Okay, let's start at the top of the pen and we will work our way down. So first up is the finial. That's going to be this little part right here. It comes at the end of the cap towards the top of the pen, typically towards where the clip is. So we have a black finial here. Sometimes you'll have a finial that matches the rest of the cap. We still refer to it as a finial typically. As you can see on this noodlers, the finial is actually useful. It is a screw-in piece that holds the clip in place. And there you have it. That's a finial. Next point of discussion is a clip. Now, obviously, this is a clip. The clip functions to hold a pen to your pocket or, whatever else you want to clip it to. If you have a case, you could fit your, elastic band through here, whatever you got. It'll hold the pen in place. They come in all shapes and sizes, and if the pen is on your desk, it also prevents it from rolling. The counterpart to a clip would be a roll stop, so I'm going to include that as well. This little nubbin right here prevents this pen from rolling too far off your desk, which is another important function of a clip or a roll stop. Okay, let's talk about the cap. The cap of a pen covers the nib when the pen is not in use. So as you can see, this one just snaps on. However, you can also have ones that are threaded, so you have to unscrew the pen from its cap. You can see how that works there. Okay, going back to these two pens, let's talk about an inner cap or a cap seal. As you may be able to tell, there's a frosted section near the nib on both of these caps, and what this does is it helps to prevent the nib from drying out. So between writing sessions, that inner cap seals off your nib so that it won't evaporate all the ink and dry out on you. And even little inexpensive pens like this one sometimes have an inner cap to help prevent them from drying out. Next up is a barrel. A barrel is simply the portion of the pen that is not the cap or the section. So this part right here, this gray part, is the barrel. It makes up the majority of the pen body. It is the thing that will probably be touching your hand when you are getting ready to write. We are now going to move on to some features you may see on a barrel that are a little more exciting than what this has going on. You may occasionally, on the barrel of your pen, find a feature. This particular pen has a crescent filler. So if I rotate this little collar here, I'm able to depress the crescent, and that will actually fill the pen. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And on vintage pens, so this is sort of a vintage design, this crescent fill, as well as a lever fill. So you actually get your nail in there and pull up this little bar. Now this bar is doing the same exact thing that the crescent is. It is depressing an internal sac, so it creates a negative pressure when you let go, which will draw up ink. We will talk more about that later. Okay, now for the section of the pen. The section is the portion from which the nib emerges. So this part right here, it's basically, I think of it as the grip section, which is how I remember what it's called. The grip section, the section of the pen where the nib and the feed are housed. Sometimes you have a nice round section like this one, and sometimes pens will encourage you to take a particular grip. So as you can see, this one has a flat spot on 3 different sides, and this is meant to reflect where your fingers end up being positioned while holding the pen. So the section will dictate how you hold the pen, unless you're, maybe an artist or somebody who likes a really sort of loose grip. I have seen people grip way back here if they're getting loose and sketchy with it, or if they have really big flowy handwriting. They might not choke up on the section, they might kind of let it ride back further. But there you go, and sections sometimes are kind of transparent like this one, which is kind of cool. I think it makes for a pretty neat look. That's going to be personal preference though. Alright, next let's talk about feeds. So a feed is typically found under the nib and running into the section, as you can see here. It looks sort of like a comb from the side. All these little spaces in between are meant to hold ink. So the section actually has a little hole in it, which is very small, which by pure physics draws ink from whatever is holding your ink up through the section and delivers it to the nib so that you can write. So as you can see, that little red thread in the center is the ink creeping up the center of the feed, and this is what ultimately delivers ink to the tip of the nib. I know it doesn't look fast, but it is purely physics in action. This tiny tube just simply moves liquid through it. This is how the capillaries in your body work, and that is why this is called capillary action. Oh, there. I've put a little bit of ink in the cartridge, and you can see it permeating the fins on the section, or feed, rather. I'm sorry, I keep calling it a section. So you can see how those fins will hold extra ink, and this helps keep your nib from drying out. Some sections are transparent, like this one, which can be very cool when you fill it with ink. You get to see all the color running through it. Sometimes they are just plain black. Let me see, I think I've got, this is a pilot section underneath here, sort of like a dusty gray. But you can see again that the feed runs from almost the tip of the nib all the way through the section and interacts directly with your ink reservoir, however you are containing ink in the pen. Let's talk briefly about cartridges. So some pens, when you go to ink them up, only accept cartridges. These are pre-filled little plastic things full of ink. Now basically you stick a cartridge in here, and typically when you push it in you will break a seal. You'll either feel it or hear a little pop, and then your ink will start flowing through your feed. And just a quick note, cartridges come in all shapes and sizes. This one's considered standard international. However, a lot of brands have their own proprietary cartridge design. This is a Schaefer cartridge, this is a Platinum cartridge. Pilot has their own, Lamy has their own. So please check the brand of your pen when you are trying to figure out which cartridges to buy. Okay, obviously a cartridge is not the only way to fill up your pen, as you saw right here. This is called a converter, or cartridge converter. Basically, a pen that will take a cartridge will sometimes have available this thing. It's called a converter. It's basically a device that allows you to use your own ink. So if I wanted to, I could dip the end of this in a reservoir of ink and use that little screw to pull up ink into this converter and then slap it on the pen. You can also use it when it is stuck into the section like so. You can dip the entire nib up to about here and then squeeze out the air and draw up ink. Use some of this faux ink here to demonstrate how you can fill a converter. Fill a converter. So you can either take the converter, squeeze out all of the air, push that little piston thing to the end there, and I'm tilting this so you can see, dip it in your ink, screw it up, and it will draw ink into there. The little bit better method, in my opinion, is to keep the whole unit together. So converter, section, feed, and nib. And you're going to submerge all of it so that the nib is completely in your ink. See that? Now, when I pull up the ink, I am priming. This is called priming the feed. It just means that my feed is now completely saturated with ink and I can write basically immediately. It'll probably be a little bit heavy-handed at first, but should die down to a normal feed rate after a while. This ink is too light to see. You can't really see it, but trust me, it's gonna write right away with some proper ink in there. So yeah, that's the very basic overview of what a converter does. Next up, let's talk about sac fillers. And for that, I think we're gonna need a little illustration here. So this is called an aerometric converter. It does essentially the same thing as the screw type converters, although this one is sac based. So as you can see in here, there's a clear rubber sac which gets depressed when I hit this little bar. And so that's what's going on in like vintage pens. They essentially have an ink sac inside, which modern pens have replaced with the plastic cartridge converters. But the sac fillers are mostly vintage. As you can see here, both of these pens are doing the same thing as the converter in this one over here. They are sacs. You depress the sac and let it go in the presence of ink, and it will draw ink into the sac. So that's a sac filler. Sometimes you have modern ones, sometimes you have vintage ones. Just be on the lookout and be aware of it. Okay, let's talk about eyedropper filling. So I'm going to break out this Kaweco Sport. So eyedropper filling is when you say, I don't want a cartridge, I don't want a converter, I want to fill the entire barrel with ink. So in order to do this, you need a barrel that has no holes in it. And I say that because certain pens, such as this one, have holes in the barrel. Anytime a pen is marketed towards children, it needs to not be able to choke them to death. So let's say a kid swallows the barrel of this Pilot Kakuno, they will not suffocate because they have holes in the barrel. However, Kaweco Sport does not have holes, and the section and the barrel are made of the same material that is not metal. If you have metal on metal, do not eyedropper fill. It's not a good idea. Inks can be very damaging to metal. So what you'll want is either plastic on plastic or rubber on rubber in the case of an ebonite pen. But anyway, you would grease up the threads using a silicone grease and literally fill your ink into the barrel. And as you can see, this will hold a whole bunch of ink. This is like 2 milliliters right here. This will probably hold like 3 mils of ink, and you can write for a very long time with that amount. So this is a Kaweco Sport. To eyedropper fill this, put a little silicone grease on these threads so that when it's sealed back up, the plastic on plastic connection will be solid enough that it holds ink. So unscrew your section, put it aside. You won't need a cartridge or converter. What you need is some ink and an eyedropper. This is why it's called eyedropper filling. Suck up some ink in your eyedropper and literally drop it into your pen. It's going to hold quite a bit. Alright, that's enough for me. And the reason I know it's enough, I'll show you. So it is full enough that I have a good amount of ink, but I am not yet in contact with any threading. So when I screw it back together, I want to make sure the threading is dry with its grease on there, and that should be sufficient to hold our ink. There we go. So let's just make sure this writes. Give that a second to fill up the feed. Sometimes you can get an eyedropper started just with the heat of your hands. This actually tends to be my problem with eyedroppers, is I heat up the air inside the barrel too much and I end up getting too much ink flow through my feed. This will not happen to everyone. I know for a fact that it doesn't. I am just one of those cases where it does. So I don't know if you can see it because I really watered this ink down for the video, but we are writing. That was maybe 2 minutes. And there you have it. Eyedropper filling. And you can see your ink sloshing around, which is fun, and can be really cool if you have a perfectly clear pen. You know, something like this, with the ink sloshing around, makes a pretty nice conversation piece, if I'm being honest. So, you're familiar with a converter at this point. A piston filling pen basically just takes the concept a step further, and you fill the entire barrel using an integrated piston mechanism. This is the TWSBI Eco. You can see we have a double seal right here. This little piston slides back and forth, drawing air or liquid ink through this section. So the nib and feed, it'll suck it through the section into the barrel and fill this chamber. So that's the TWSBI Eco. And just for kind of size comparison and competition, here's the Noodler's Conrad, and this one has a piston as well, and also a real blind cap. This is the original use of a blind cap, was hiding the piston turning knob. Okay, anyway, we're going to fill the Eco with our faux ink here, just so you can see how it works. And side note, if you've got a tight seal on your piston, this should resist vacuum and also pressure. So right now, this was fully extended, so I am now creating a vacuum in this air chamber, which is sucking the piston back into place. So you should see at least a little bit of that kind of thing happening. And the reverse is true. This is now filled with atmospheric pressure air. If we try and compress it, pushes our piston back. Cool. Alright, let's get this thing filled up. Push our piston all the way down. Dip the whole assembly in here so that the nib is entirely submerged. You can see we have some contamination from the last thing this was filled with. Whoa. Obviously some blue still hanging out in there. So now we're getting a weird mixture in our barrel. Well, that got weird fast. We ended up with green somehow. And yeah, since we dipped it in, it should write right away. There we go. Hey, look at that. Look how poorly I cleaned the feed. Alright, well, you got the idea. Okay, let's finally talk nibs. So, even if you're new to fountain pens, I think you know what a nib is. A nib is a piece of steel that is in the section that interacts with the feed. It typically has a very hard tipping material, so you can write with it for a very long time, and by that I mean, you know, years and years. They can be made of steel, such as this one. You can also have a titanium nib. So this one's titanium. It is slightly more flexible than steel. You can also have a gold nib. I know it's hard to tell, but this is an 18 karat gold nib. This is a Pilot broad vanishing point. This does have a gold nib, which is as flexible as titanium, a little bit more forgiving. However, it is much more expensive. You can also get specialty steel nibs, and this is the OmniFlex nib from Conklin. So this is a specialty nib that has been cut in such a way, and this is not custom, you can buy these on their own. You can see I can get a very thin line if I use no pressure, and then if I push down on it a bit, it flexes out. Now this is a specialty steel nib, you can't do this with everything, that's why it looks funky, kind of like a harpoon. But yeah, nibs come in all shapes, sizes, and abilities, and are one of the more fun aspects of fountain pen collecting. And this last discussion point is not actually to do with the anatomy of a pen. It is actually going to be a quick discussion about how you hold it. So this is a fairly standard writing position right here. 3 fingers. You have first finger, second finger, and your thumb. I like to rest on my second finger. Some people will kind of grip it more like this. But anyway, these 3 fingers on your hand are going to be what's holding the fountain pen. And you're going to write at an angle. I know it's hard to see. Maybe I'll cut in a shot from down low. But yeah, basically that's what you're going to do. A 3-finger grip, write at an angle, and always write with the nib facing up towards you so that you can see the metal. And there you have it. There's your basic fountain pen anatomy. It does get more complex than this. If you have additional questions, or you're like, hey, I got a pen that it's got something on it that I don't understand, feel free to ask me. This is intended to be a resource available to beginners and fountain pen enthusiasts alike. So, I have been Joe. You've been watching Ink&Iron. Thank you for joining me today for Fountain Pen Anatomy Basics. If you have suggestions, comments, questions, please put them in my comments section. Consider hitting that like button. If you really like the content, you can subscribe or check out my Patreon. It is free and you get bonus content. All right, you guys have a good day. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on my next video.